Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just wait till people join the meeting. Apologies for the late start, but we're all here now.
Yes.
Lovely. My name is Victoria Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation for Developing Compassion and Wisdom. Today's session will be 60 minutes long and will include time for questions and answers at the end. The session is organised by the Foundation for Developing Compassion and Wisdom, which is a non-profit dedicated to a kinder, wiser, more compassionate world. We offer resources for developing a warm heart and a wise mind. Our content is rooted in the ancient wisdom of Buddhist philosophy and psychology, as well as modern psychology and sciences of the mind like neuroscience. Our approach uncovers a deeper understanding of our mind, our material world, and how these two are interconnected. This understanding leads to a more compassionate and caring attitude towards others, an attitude that can become stable and unwavering. FDCW takes inspiration from its patron, the Dalai Lama, who has said, when it comes to developing our understanding and increasing the positive qualities of our mind, the potential is limitless. Some of you may have joined our online Compassion, Wisdom and Action conference in November last year. During that conference, FDCW's president, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, gave a very inspiring talk on compassion and kindness. Rinpoche has urged us to live with compassion, to work with compassion, meditate with compassion, die with compassion. When problems come, experience them with compassion, enjoy with compassion. We felt inspired to explore this in more depth. How can we put compassion into practice in our daily life? So we came up with a series of 6 webinars held throughout the year, each webinar exploring compassion from a different perspective. I am absolutely thrilled and delighted that Venerable Robina Courtin has so kindly agreed to launch our compassion webinar series. Today, she speaks on the topic, when problems come, experiencing them with compassion. I've had the privilege of knowing Venerable Robina for more than 20 years. I could talk about the many books she's written, the books she's edited, the podcasts she's given, her ordination as a nun in 1978, her work at Wisdom Publications and also at Mandala magazine, her non-stop teaching schedule, her work bringing Buddhist teachings to prisoners all over the world, the film that's been made about her life called Chasing Buddha, her incredibly beautiful singing voice, her thousands and thousands of devoted students around the world, her sense of humor. But what I want to share with you is this. Some time ago, I heard a story that Lama Zopa Rinpoche was talking to someone who was critical of Venerable Robina. And Rinpoche replied, I wish I had 100 Robinas. She's a force to be reckoned with, and she has the ability to wake us all up. And if anyone can show us how to put compassion into action, it's her. So please now, over to you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, Victoria, darling. Thank you, everybody. Happy to be here. Happy to be here. Happy to be here. So it's a pretty tough call, isn't it, actually? I mean, saying, try to be compassionate when other people are suffering, but to actually try, that's it's easy in comparison. Almost it seems like a puzzle. What does it mean? Experience problems with compassion. I mean, we can also say, one very typical approach, as we know in the Mahayana teachings, we're really trying to grow our marvelous capacity for compassion, which implies we've done a lot of work before that on learning to develop our own qualities, lessening our attachment, lessening our anger, lessening our depression and confusion, which is, a bird needs 2 wings, and that's the wisdom wing. But here, the compassion wing, the idea of even transforming, they talk about transforming problems. For example, Lama Zopa would say, we need to learn to like problems like we like ice cream. But my feeling is that's easy, seeing things as good, seeing problems as good, like your headache, thinking, okay, this is okay, I can handle this. This is easy. If we compare with this one, experience problems with compassion, this is another kettle of fish. It almost seems abstract. What does it mean? So I think we've got to analyze it, So I mean, it's hard to understand it actually, because I know the example of Lama Zopa Rinpoche is a good one. That he had a stroke in 2011 or something, and the people who were around him, he was in hospital first, and there's Catholic nuns, and he in the Catholic hospital, and then eventually, and then whatever, doing his rehabilitation. But everyone said that he was like ridiculously happy. And it seemed like almost he had this astonishing, he experienced this suffering. I mean, having a stroke is suffering, you know, being paralyzed. It seemed to increase his compassion. So, I mean, that's hard to understand. What does it literally mean? All we can do is try to nut it out, you know. It sounds wonderful, but why would having his own suffering increase his compassion? It seems an odd one, you know, and of course, way ahead for most of us, way too advanced. I can't even begin to think like that. So first of all, he was ridiculously joyful. I mean, this is almost too weird. So if we try and imagine, you know, on the Bodhisattva path, this advanced, you know, this advanced spiritual practice that, of course, the Tibetans are expert at, you know, it means as we progress, first of all, the first level of practice is learn to know our own minds well, to really see our own fears, our limitations, our depression, our anger, and our jealousy. And the reason to see these is not to feel guilty or bad or to blame ourselves, but is to see that these are why we suffer, you know. This is hard for us. We tend to feel guilty. We don't like it being pointed out that I'm angry and depressed and jealous. We feel someone's pointing fingers at us. But the Buddhist approach is to realize that this is limiting us. Forget about the harm we do to others if you're angry. And this is hard for us to see, to really see that the anger and depression and anxiety and fears, they are what limit me. They are what cause me pain. So this first stage of practice, you know, is to us to just recognize this, and as we lessen our neuroses and grow our goodness, the consequence again is that we become more content, we become more fulfilled, and inevitably, because we're removing the barriers that ego has constructed between me and others, we inevitably become closer to others. And we start to look in the world and we realize, oh my God, everybody's in the same boat. Look at the depressed people, look at the angry people, look at the jealous people. Now, yes, the angry and jealous people are harming others. That's the only thing we normally see. But because we've seen our own mind, we know that's what's caused me my pain. Now I can see that that's what's causing everybody their pain. This is a really crucial step to get to. So as we keep progressing on these more advanced stages of the compassion wing, which are contingent upon these earlier stages, you know, it's a very progressive spiritual path, internal path, then you develop this kind of outrageous, they call it the courageous compassion of the Bodhisattva. It's a bit like a fierce mother, as if the whole world is her children. So we know the fierce, outrageous, courageous things that mothers would do for their own babies. Anything, you know, they would live. I remember seeing a video years ago, mothers who lift up a car to save their baby, mothers who run into a fire to save their baby. That attitude is really what bodhisattvas are. The difference is everybody is their child. You could say it like that. So the other point there is this fierce sense of responsibility, that they know it's their job to do whatever they can. So if we can try and imagine this level of compassion, which is hard, it's really hard, and it really is, when it really is advanced, you have to realize that person at that level has gone beyond ego, gone beyond attachment, gone beyond their own limitations, which is almost hard for us to comprehend as a reality in modern psychology. It seems weird almost, but this is the Buddhist path. It's all there in the literature, you know, the possibility of this. So these bodhisattvas are these outrageously compassionate beings. So the point is this. This is hard to hear, but this is literally how it is. What drives these bodhisattvas what drives them to continue to practice is their, as Lama Zopa calls it, unbearable compassion for other sentient beings suffering, unbearable compassion. And like a mother for her child, the thought of wasting a single second not helping sentient beings would be unbearable for them. You know, this is the point. It's hard to imagine this level of courage and enthusiasm. So the point is they see very clearly that they're not fully developed as a Buddha yet. And they want to become, their whole drive is the wish to become a Buddha. That means a person who's perfectly qualified, who's gone beyond all delusions, gone beyond all neuroses. I mean, if we can conceptualize this, imagine the possibility of this, then for that person, an opportunity to develop and to increase their compassion is when they have suffering. So when you talk about people who were around, talk to people who were around Lama Zopa when he had his stroke, it seemed like, you know, he, for example, would talk about how when he, in the midst of that suffering, it increased his compassion like 1,000-fold, because everything he experienced, he was thinking, this is what these bodhisattvas do. These are practices that we can all do. And it's very interesting. It's related very much to this. I mean, one way of accomplishing this kind of practice, which is very popular in the West, and I'm always very surprised, is this meditation called Tonglen. which is when you use your breath, and people love this meditation, which is really advanced, but people love it. So when you breathe in, you're breathing using your breath, you're taking upon yourself the suffering of others, and you're delighting in breathing out and wanting others to be happy. So this whole attitude of wanting to take upon yourself the suffering of others, this is the Tonglen meditation. And I'm always astonished that it really is very popular in the West, you know, that you imagine your friend even in front of you, you're doing your meditation, you imagine your friend in front of you with a headache. And the meditation is literally when you breathe in, imagine taking upon yourself, like you breathe in like this yucky smoke, you imagine it's their headache kind of peeling off them and coming onto you, and you happily breathe it in, and you imagine it smashes all your ego grasping and smashes your self-centeredness, smashes your fears and your delusions. I mean, it's a really intense practice, but like I say, people love doing this. And then when you breathe out, you imagine this blissful light, and you give this person, you imagine giving this person your happiness, giving this person. So these bodies, that's a practice, it's a training to develop bodhicitta. But the ones who've got it, then every opportunity of suffering, like Lama Zopa, he was more happy, more joyful, and truly experienced his suffering as if it were taking upon himself the suffering of every living being, which is really like a vast version of this Tonglen meditation. I mean, this is exhausting to think about it. And it almost seems weird in our ordinary psychological models, where we're usually so much suffering and so victimized and so depressed and so anxious. The idea of happily taking upon yourself someone else's suffering, or having a problem and imagining, oh my goodness, I'm so glad to have this problem because it'll lessen my delusions and increase my compassion. Now that's intense. I mean, it's almost like I can hardly talk about it. It's so intense, you know, it's so unlikely for most of us. But if we hear the logic of it, it's kind of powerful, you know. So maybe practice it once a month. Maybe even the thought, you know, even the thought of when I have problems, things that attachment doesn't like. It's sort of obvious the way to smash attachment, to smash this unhappy kind of unhappiness we all have rooted in attachment and aversion and depression, which Buddha's analysis is very clear about, are not at the core of our being and can be removed, but indeed one step at a time. If we can have the courage every now and again, you know, when there is a problem, you've got a headache, to think, just a thought, to think, how marvelous if I could take upon the suffering, all headaches of everybody else. May I have this headache for their sake. I mean, the thing is, it's an interesting point, this. We then think, well, that's weird. How can you take everybody else's happiness, everybody else's headaches? You can't take their headaches. But this is the point here. It's like a technique for you to act. If you could, you would rather have the headache. So this Tonglen, and really this is the essence of it, this Tonglen practice. It's not, if you're visualizing taking upon yourself a person's headache, being happy to have that problem instead of them, you're not trying to get a headache. That's a complete misconception. And it's not even a healing technique. This is not to heal them. In a sense, it's you training yourself to develop the courage if you could, you would rather have the headache than this person. I mean, you hear parents talk like this. It's so unbelievably moving, you know. I remember a friend in prison, Richie, this guy who's an ex-gangster, Mexican gangster from the streets of Los Angeles. He's got life in prison. I've known him for 25 years. And years ago, you know, he had some kind of, he said there was one of his, you know, my people, Mexican, there's a lot of these young men in Mexico, a lot of the gangsters. The laws are changing, I think, now in California. When you're even as a juvenile, you're actually sentenced as an adult, you know. And he said it would be heartbreaking for him to see my people, these young guys, come in. He said, I wish I could take upon myself their sentence and they could be released. I mean, that's an incredible thing to think. It's an unbelievable thought to have. And see, the thing is, because when we understand karma, this fundamental Buddhist view, and this is what we don't think in the West, you know, this is not our psychology, that every thought we have nothing goes astray, and every thought we have actually counts, because it's the thoughts that produce our behavior. It's the thoughts that produce the person we become. I mean, it's sort of fairly evident in ordinary life. You know, it's you're working, you're learning music, you're learning changing your thoughts about music that cause you to become a musician. We don't think of it this way, but you produce the musician. Well, this approach here is we are producing the person we become. We are producing by the way we use our thoughts. Where it starts with the thoughts. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought. So when you have thoughts, we just think in our culture, oh, they're just kind of, who cares? You can think what you like, it doesn't matter. But every thought, you sow a seed in your mind, you program your mind. So to sit there and even have simply the thoughts, there's a person with a headache. If only, I'd prefer to have the headache than them. I wish I could have the headache. It's sort of putting atomic bombs, under the instinct of ego, which is necessarily self-centered. This is the Buddhist analysis. So even just a thought, a casual thought, but a sincere thought, not to mention doing it in a meditation, it just doesn't go astray. It's unbelievably powerful, smashing your own fears, your own limitations, your own delusions, because it's a very courageous thought. And it's not some kind of weird martyr thought, And as Pabonka Rinpoche says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, you need to be a suitable vessel to have these thoughts. They're very powerful. You better be very sincere about it. So from one's own side, they're an amazing practice. Very quickly will we make progress in our spiritual path, because this Tonglen isn't, like I said, to heal the other person. There's lots of healing techniques. It isn't to get a headache. It's to train yourself to have the courage to think, if I could, I would rather have the headache. So that's just a thought. But what about the time when you actually have the suffering? That's the point. So Tonglen is like a preparation for this. It's merely your thinking, but it's training your mind to develop that level of compassion, that courageous level of compassion. But then, of course, there is the time when the problem actually is there. And let's say you have a headache. Let's say something tragic has happened. Let's say, bad things are happening in your relationships. These are problems. So to try and have this attitude that if I can be brave in experiencing this problem, realizing that everybody on the planet has problems, and that can develop real empathy, and to have the thoughts that let me experience this, as if it were me taking upon myself the suffering of others. It's a very powerful thought. But, Pabonka Rinpoche says you better be a suitable vessel, because we hear these things, but if we're not clear what our capability is, we can make mistakes. Like, you imagine then if you're an ordinary person who hasn't done much inner work, you're in a very suffering relationship where you are very victimized, your partner's a bully, and you just get punched in the nose. I don't think that is a suitable vessel for a person to have this kind of approach. Because you're overwhelmed by the suffering, you're full of anger, you're full of fear, you don't have any courage to leave that ridiculous relationship. That is not a suitable vessel. That is not your practice. Your practice is to have the courage to leave that ridiculous man. So this is an advanced practice, It's not the practice of a martyr, of a victim. No way, it's quite advanced. It is powerful to talk that way. We don't tend to think of compassion being a more advanced practice, but it is more advanced. It's very powerful. A suitable vessel is a person who's done the work already on their own mind to some degree, who understands their mind well, who understands their attachment, who understands their fears and their depression and their anger, and who's really working on themselves. That's a suitable vessel. And even then, it's really hard practice, to experience problems with compassion. Wow. Mostly, of course, because we have masses of attachment, and all we want when problems come is to be free of them. That's all we think about. We are obsessed with being free of our problems. Even to have the patience to accept the problem, if we really can't change it at that moment, that's pretty intense. That's why I always use the examples of my friends in prison, They don't have the luxury of knowing they'll get the key next week and be able to leave this garbage place. No, some of them are there for life. Some are there for 30 years. So you either go mad because you can't change this problem, or you learn to see your problem differently. And this already is the powerful first step, learning to recognize. As we say, there's always a saying, isn't there? If you can change something, nothing wrong, please change it. But what if you can't? And we know in life, so many situations arise that we know we don't like, we know our problems, and we know we can't change. And that's not being hopeless, that's just being realistic. And this is where the suffering is. If we can recognize this, the suffering of meeting problems We assume the problem is being in the prison. The problem is your husband leaving you. The problem is the headache. Of course, they are totally a part of the problem. But the real attitude, if we've got the Buddhist analysis, which is difficult, is that the real problem that causes the worst pain is the internal one, the aversion, the anger, the despair, the depression, the hopelessness. This is hard to hear, but this is the Buddhist analysis. And if we can see this, that's where the work is. So we put all our energy into changing the husband. You try to put your energy into changing the prison, but you go mad. So this is when you've finally accepted at this moment in time, this problem, this external situation, I cannot change. That's not being passive. That's being realistic. So then you do work on the mind. That's when the real work starts. This is the classical Buddhist approach. We can change our minds. Or as His Holiness said, so simple, it's unbelievable. We can learn to see things from another point of view. This is almost so powerful, but very hard when we're fixed. This is a problem, like an immutable problem. This is why we go crazy, because we want it to be different. We wish it would go away, and we can really see that there's no way out. So that's when we become profoundly depressed, completely hopeless, suicidal, want to kill other people, lose our minds. This is the tragedy, So even just having the attitude, the very first level of Buddhist practice is knowing we have got the power to change the way we interpret the scenario. This is the first step, experiencing with compassion is literally advanced practice. The very first level is have this kind of a recognition that I can't get out of prison. Not now. Maybe 5 years, but not now. Maybe 10, but not now. That's right in front of me. It is impossible to change it. So the only option we've got is to change our interpretation of it. This is the one of seeing it from another point of view. This is the first work to do. This is already outrageous, but this is less advanced than this attitude of experiencing with compassion, with joy. That's like insane for us, But there's logic to it if we understand properly, not make it like sentimental. This example of Lama Zopa, I think, is a perfect one. Genuinely joyful. It's hard to hear this because it's based on unbelievable compassion. And this level of compassion, I think, is hard for us to imagine. We can say it. And when you read the extensive literature in the Bodhisattva teachings, it's actually laid out there, the levels and levels and levels that you can accomplish. And it's like way more powerful, more outrageous than the levels of compassion that we are familiar with now, which are extremely limited in compassion, in capacity, extremely limited in their capacity, So I think it's important to know these words are genuine, they're real, the teachings are all there, the techniques are all there. And of course, to know it's advanced. So at least try, do our best. They're pretty intense teachings, I tell you. I mean, I joke and I don't joke. I say, I'd rather talk about emptiness any day. That's easy. Bodhicitta, this level of compassion, is like over the top, I mean, even any Dharma, almost Milarepa said, whatever the world does, Dharma's opposite. Well, this is like over the top opposite, ridiculously opposite. Like hard to find, imagine. I mean, it's when we read, if we've been Christians or Catholics, we read about the saints. That's the bodhisattvas, they're the bodhisattvas, over the top, extreme, hard to imagine we can all become like that. But this is the Buddhist view. We've all got the potential. So it's pretty intense, really. I'd say it's not the end yet, but I want questions now. I think that's when the good discussions start. Please open up. Please ask me questions. Very happy to hear. This is when the really delicious discussion comes.
Can I ask a question, Robina?
Absolutely.
When you talk about compassion and the bodhisattvas, where do we start right now? What role does meditation or mindfulness play in this? How important is it to sort of settle yourself each day, where you sort of take on the world's problems?
Even looking at the classic presentation, Victoria, as we know well, looking at the classic presentation of this so-called Lam Rim, this packaging of Buddha's path to enlightenment, that's quite literally step by step. It's kind of interesting. Grade 1 entry level is not to sit down and meditate. Grade 1 entry level, this sounds so boring, it's embarrassing. Grade 1 entry level is control your body and control your speech. So in your relationship, I mean, yeah, sitting down to also meditate, nothing wrong. But the first practice, the first sincere practice is to at least make a vow in the morning. And you know, you've got your family, the kids, the traffic, the bosses, your colleagues at work, whatever, to make a decision in the morning. I will not say one bad word to one human being. This sounds hilarious, but that's the level of practice at first. Control your body and control your speech, like control the servants of your mind. Then you can begin to get some awareness, some space to observe the thoughts that inform your body and inform your speech. This is an utter surprise to us. We would never think that were a spiritual practice. We would never think, oh, I'm going to control my speech today, that that's a spiritual practice. But this is the very first stage of practice. The essence of the first level of practice is to harness your body and speech, to discipline yourself, to be controlled with your body and speech, and at least don't harm others. This is the first level. It can be enhanced and helped, absolutely. This is a common one, by having a 3-minute practice in the morning when you wake up first. You know, you wake up, you decide, wow, I'm going to make the most of my day. You can sit for a couple of minutes, maybe you have your cup of tea, whatever. And even just do a little bit of reading for 2 minutes or watch your breath for 2 minutes and make a decision. You've got to make a decision. Everything exists on the tip of the wish, as Lama Zopa says. You make a decision. I know what I'm going to do today. Who I'm going to see. I'm going to navigate it as well as I can. Control my body and speech, and then attempt to control my mind. I mean, this is the general approach of the Buddhist approach to life. You know, this is the thing. So any meditation you do is to enhance that, not to bring anything magical. This is the wisdom wing, and I swear to you, this is not much to do with compassion yet. This is more like compassion for yourself, harnessing yourself so you don't run around completely making a mess. Then as you progress in this, you can then open your eyes and realize we're all in the same boat. That's when compassion can kick in. So you've first got to, you know, again, like I say, if you're in a relationship that's so overwhelming, you're overwhelmed by the kids, you're overwhelmed by the hubby, life is too much. And this is the commonest thing for millions of human beings. The thought of being compassionate to others just makes you tired. You've got no ounce of energy for anybody. Well, don't criticize that. That's because we're overwhelmed by our own suffering. So we've got to deal with that first. You can also argue, and we do know this is true, that a moment of reaching out to someone else is a powerful antidote to your own misery. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's good. It's good to taste that. But if you can't bear the thought, it's too exhausting if you're overwhelmed by your misery and your suffering to think of compassion for others. That's okay. We have to know where we're at, you know. We have to know where we're at. Some people have this capacity. Some people are naturally kind, naturally loving, very compassionate, and it is effortless for them to worry about their body and speech. But we have to know where we're at in our lives and what our scenarios are, you know. So it's a multitude of things. But starting, another way to put it, I would say, is starting with knowing you've got the potential to change. I mean, the bottom line is, as Lama Zopa says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like, you know. So knowing we've got that potential. So it's not a simple answer, Victoria. There's no magic.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, Elisa. Hello, sweetheart. Happy to see you. So glad to see you.
Thank you very much. So nice to see you as well. Thank you for being here.
Good.
My question is, if we've been able to generate these feelings of compassion, but we're unable to physically help the person or situation that we're compassionate toward.
That's right.
Do our feelings of compassion help that situation or person?
That's a really good person. A really good point, you know. I think that's a very interesting point, because in the usual way we think about when we say compassion, what we assume is you go off and help people. That's what compassion is. We think it as action. So then the thought of just feeling compassionate, which is a very Buddhist thing, but I'll explain what I mean, doesn't seem complete enough. It seems rather almost, oh, so she feels compassionate, who cares? So I think we always feel it has to be action, but the Buddhist approach, as we know, you've got to start with the mind. I mean, if we think of some people, this doesn't make sense for us in our culture. If we think of some people who go off into the mountains for years doing compassion meditations, we think, what is the point of all this? What is the point? Because what it is, the Buddhist one isn't just that you go out and feel a nice feeling about somebody and felt compassionate for a moment, and then 2 minutes later, you want to punch your husband in the nose. This is the Buddhist approach, is that you can cultivate and grow to the most tremendous degrees this compassion. It's a training that we need to occupy, we need to do. And so that includes having compassionate thoughts. I'm going to get to your answer in a minute. It includes every day cultivating compassionate thoughts, having a compassionate motivation in which we imagine being compassionate, in which you imagine taking upon yourself the suffering of others. This is not just self-centeredness. This is not just self-involvement. These are powerful techniques that literally grow your compassion. So then effortlessly, when the time comes, you can put it into practice. So I would say not necessarily every time you sit in your house and have compassionate thoughts when you watch the television about, like, say, the suffering in Ukraine, I don't necessarily think that's going to benefit the next door neighbor even. But I think it's definitely not a waste of thoughts, because every time you have compassion, you're programming your mind with compassion. You're going to have more and more compassion, and then you can easily put your money where your mouth is when the opportunity comes. So it's training, you know. But it's still, on the other hand, I remember in the 70s when I did transcendental meditation, and I think Maharishi, whoever it was, I forget his name, they did research. These transcendental meditation people did research, and they found that something like if 2% of people in any one area were all meditating, it definitely had an effect on the world. And I think that's not impossible as well, Elise. You think about it. If you walk into a room where people have been arguing, they're not saying a word, but we all say you can cut the atmosphere with a knife because their minds are angry. Look at what it does to people. But just seeing a happy person with a compassionate mind, we know that affects people. We know it helps people. So I think in that simple sense, yes, having people around us who are compassionate, it definitely can, I think, has an effect. It has to have an effect. It has to have a very powerful effect. Do you understand? Don't you agree? Yes. So, who is it? Alicia. Hello, Alicia.
Hi.
Alicia, I can't see you. I'd love to see you as well, but you're not there. There we go.
Here we go.
Good, darling.
Hi. Thank you for being here. My question is, when you are behaving or having feelings of compassion towards others and they're suffering, and they're taking their suffering out on you. They don't really understand what's going on, and they're just behaving in a way that's hurting others. At what point do I change for them for feeling like I'm being disrespectful or uncompassionate to myself? Like at what point do I decide I can still feel compassionate for them, but not
exactly. No, I understand.
Let them hurt me.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Alicia, and this is it's very helpful to understand this kind of the psychological approach in Buddhism in a progressive way, our abilities, you know. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, compassion is the point, but compassion is not enough. We've got to have wisdom. So what that means is, in the Buddhist analysis, what that means is, like I've been suggesting already, the very first level of practice, this is an analogy, the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. A bird needs two wings. So the first work is the wisdom wing. And what that literally means is you start to do the inner work. You start to learn to know yourself. You recognize you try to control your body and speech. You try not to harm others. You try to control yourself. You get to know your own mind. You recognize your own attachment, you recognize your anger, you recognize your fears. Because why, Alicia, is because they are the source of my pain. And so the thing is, the work we do there, then on the basis of this, we are able to have compassion. Now, we all know we have compassion, even if we're still full of misery ourselves. Many people have compassion. Maybe we're very needy. We want people to approve of us, but we also have compassion. But the trouble is, if I've got all that attachment and all that neediness to be seen as a good girl, to be approved of, and then my compassion is then put onto a person who abuses me, then of course we're going to get completely upset. We are going to get completely upset. So the thing is, we have to have the wisdom to know how to be with that person. You've got to have the wisdom to know how to behave. So let's say it's your poor old grandma who's angry and miserable and paranoid and demanding of you, and you're trying to be so compassionate. Everything you do, she's mean to you. We know there are situations like this. So you can say that, in a way, if you think it's useful to say something, but usually with a person like that who's taking advantage of you because they're miserable, when they are miserable, that's when we take advantage of each other, then it's not going to help them saying something. So maybe the thing is to retreat, not to try and explain, just to realize they're not capable, and then to not expect it from them, and to withdraw. Maybe that's a more wise thing to do. If you genuinely think saying something will help them change, but often it won't. Often we talk because we want to be expressed. We want them to hear what we think. But if they're miserable, they're being mean to you, they're not capable of hearing you. So often it's just best just to move away if you can, or not expect them to be different. I mean, it's a tricky one, Alicia. Are you hearing me? The point I'm trying to say is often you've got to,
yes, I understand. Thank you.
But often often if we're feeling hurt by others, which is very common, and we are being compassionate, but the person's just mean and nasty because they're so miserable. I think the thing is this, Alicia, when we realize that the only reason a person is mean is because they're miserable. We don't like to hear that because it sounds like you're getting them off the hook. No, that's why they're miserable. They're miserable. That's why they're mean. So if we realize that, it's like there's no point in expecting it from them. So we'll try not to take it too personally. But this is tough because it implies you're really together in yourself. But then when we learn from it and realize that we've got to be wise in whom in the people we hang out with and the people we show compassion to. Because often if I'm being compassionate, they somehow should know I'm being compassionate and repay me, with the kindness sort of thing. But it doesn't work like that. So we've got to really see, we've got to be more wise with each other, more skillful. Sometimes say no, for example. Do you understand what I'm saying? You with me? You think it's answering your point, darling?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Abelardo. Good evening.
Good evening, Venerable.
Yes.
My question, one of the main methods for cultivating bodhicitta is imagining every being one meets has been one's mother in a previous life, right? Now, that implies that one has faith in rebirth. How can one strengthen one's faith in rebirth?
I think we have to be logical about it. I mean, faith in something has to be based on wisdom. I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying one time, when a person asked, how can you prove it? He said, it's easy. But that means using logic, Abelardo. That means we've got to move into the Buddhist system, take the Buddhist hypotheses. The hypothesis, we have to first establish the hypothesis that consciousness is not physical. Now, this is difficult, Abelardo, because we can't prove it yet. We're not advanced enough. So it has to be our hypothesis. So there's no other choice. We have to hypothesize the view that Buddha tells us is correct, that he has observed, which is consciousness is not physical. And then, as His Holiness says, when we understand the law of cause and effect, so that the substantial cause of a moment of consciousness, which is not physical, has to be a previous moment of consciousness, His Holiness says. So if you can track back your consciousness theoretically in your meditation, one moment at a time, well, this moment came from the previous, inexorably you'll get back to the first moment at the time the egg and sperm came together, when your consciousness, the Buddha would say, joined that egg and sperm. So if you go back a previous moment, then the egg would be in your mother's body, the sperm would be in your father's body, and that moment of consciousness that had joined the egg and sperm can only be tracked back to a previous moment of consciousness. Buddha, His Holiness says that's the logic you have to use, but it's based upon the hypothesis of non-physical consciousness, and you have to hypothesize that. Otherwise, there's no point. There's no point, Abelardo. There's no point in just crossing our fingers and believing it. That doesn't help. We have to use a basis for even theoretically, even just that simple point, taking the view that consciousness is non-physical and taking the view that consciousness comes from a previous moment before the egg and sperm. And then a few weeks before that, using the Buddhist analysis that was in a previous body. This is the type of thinking we have to do. And just to hypothesize it is enough. Not to try and force ourselves to like it or believe it. But we can't hypothesize it if we don't use the Buddhist logic of it not being physical and so on and so forth. Are you with me? I think that's a solution. That's the approach.
I think you're referring to particularly Dharma Kirti's development with that, the logic to prove that, right?
Okay, then that's it. I mean, this is one approach.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the other approach would be to hear lots of stories from people who say they have remembered past lives. And we know very well lots and lots of people, non-Buddhists as well. There's much more literature these days. That can be an approach as well that can encourage us to have confidence in this concept. Then talk to people who directly, I mean, especially as you know, in the Tibetan tradition, there's this whole tradition of people being formally recognized, people remembering. There's lots of that type of evidence that can also be useful, I think, for us.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
I agree. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Abelardo. Yes, anybody else?
Just to add that we actually did a forum last month about the science of reincarnation, and one of our facilitators, Jana, she did an extraordinary presentation giving all this evidence of this researcher who'd spent years and years documenting all of these incidents of past life, experiences, and it was quite unbelievable. It's just astonishing how much research there is on this.
This is current research. I mean, modern day research.
Yep.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I can share the link with you, Abelardo, if you're interested.
Good.
Please share would you like to put it on the chat, please?
Yeah, sure. Angela, can you do that?
Thank you.
Okay, then. Who else has questions, please? Very helpful.
I have another question.
Good, Victoria.
Yeah.
Okay,
so I was having a good day today, and then I sat down and watched the news at lunchtime. Ukraine, you touched on that, and I find my mind just start to go down and thinking about the people and the families and then the threat of nuclear war. And what I wondered is, how do you watch the news? What goes through your mind, and how do you transform it so you don't get caught up in this mass psychosis of suffering and fear and overwhelm?
I mean, I don't know about me, but let's just talk about again what the bodhisattva attitude would be. I think this is taking from the teachings, and we can attempt to have this view. That's all we can talk. I think it's important. So I think this is even if we don't talk about karma, forget even karma, having confidence in karma, which can, at least for a person who has confidence in that philosophy, who hypothesizes this view as the truth, let's say, then even that can be pretty powerful, at least understanding why this suffering is happening. Because I think one of our major problems in the world is the main way we suffer terribly is because we go, why is this happening? We can't see reasons. So at least that view, but forget that view, forget karma. My sense is this compassionate attitude of the bodhisattvas, and we can only try it, is this courageous attitude, in a sense that you have no choice but to continue to work on yourself, strengthen your wisdom, strengthen your compassion, because like as Lama Zopa would say, if I don't, the attitude of the bodhisattva is, it's my responsibility. I think there's a view called there's compassion. So what compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. And you have empathy, you reach out, you feel a connection. But the next one this is the unique one of the bodhisattva, is what they call, I think, great compassion, mahakaruna. It's like a technical term. It's the one that says, what can I do to help? That's the courageous attitude. That one we've got to cultivate. So a mother automatically would have that one. So you're on the beach and your baby is drowning. There is no question you'd have unbelievable compassion. But the unique one would be, she doesn't look around wondering who's going to save her baby. Even if she cannot swim, she's in that water. So that I think that courage, there's something about that courage that is so proactive, so powerful, that you have forced yourself to go beyond yourself. If you just sit there with compassion, mostly we become hopeless. We become fearful. We become hopeless. We get depressed. But the moment you think, what can I do? Okay, now you can't if you can go to Ukraine tomorrow, I will buy you your air ticket. If you can fix it, I promise I'll buy you an air ticket. But we know we can't go to Ukraine. So what do we do if we're trying to be bodhisattvas? Well, we don't have to go to Ukraine to see suffering. It is right in front of me, next door, one ant, one dog, one human, one baby. It's only because Ukraine is scale. But it's happening everywhere you turn. So the bodhisattva attitude is, it's my job right here, right now, to do what I can with what's right in front of me. And as soon as we have that courage, we become more powerful and you become more optimistic. And then you just know you will never give up. Because no matter how long, they say, no matter how long suffering is, the bodhisattvas think in terms of eons. So you have this kind of enthusiasm, they say, this effort, this enthusiasm that literally there's no point in giving up. And it wouldn't even occur to you when you've got this enthusiasm. So enthusiasm is a very powerful pusher. It pushes you forward because then you can do something. And so even I think also the other one is this. I use the analogy of, let's say, I just think of I always think of the doctors. What do you call them? Doctors sans frontières, the doctors without borders. They don't just sit there and dispense band-aids. They go to the worst places like the war zones. I guarantee right now doctors and nurses are climbing on airplanes going to Ukraine. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go into those tents where there are broken legs and injured people. Now listen to this point. That's compassion, right? But guess what they have got as well? They have got wisdom. They know how to heal people. So with compassion without wisdom is hopeless. You collapse. But if you've got some wisdom to know how to help, that gives the power. So if you walked into that tent and all you can do is put a band-aid on and you see busted legs and broken heads, you'd get depressed. But if you've got skills, you forget all about your own fears and you go straight in there, single-pointed, and do everything you can to help this one person at a time. So that's the wisdom side, and that's what gives compassion the power. The ability to know how to help. So, of course, the wisdom here we're talking about is the profound wisdom of these amazingly advanced beings who see the minds of others, who have incredible skill, not to mention, unbelievably powerful beings. So compassion on its own is not enough. You need wisdom, which is literally the ability to know how to help. And we can do that in any way we can. That gives courage to the compassion, I would say. And it's this attitude of it's my job. The courage comes from that. And enthusiasm comes from that. So you see Ukraine. So for bodhisattvas, it increases their compassion. It increases their wish to never give up doing whatever they can. One, helping others. And two, developing their own marvelous potential to become a Buddha, because then they are qualified. So it's a long-term view.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? Venerable Robina?
It's nearly over. Look, we can add some more time because I was late. Another 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever people. I mean, for me, this is heavy duty stuff. It really is. Compassion is outrageous. We love to talk about compassion, but usually it's very limited, isn't it? It's sort of for a few little pussycats and doggy woggies and children. I'm being a bit sarcastic here. But it's easy to have compassion for innocent victims. It's easy to have compassion for a little pussycat. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's kind of limited, And this is where now let's have a heavy duty level of compassion. At the moment, everybody, naturally, we have compassion for the Ukrainians. We love that. We're so moved by this wonderful president, this young man who's showing so much courage. But of course, the tragedy in our world, the degree to which we have compassion for some victims, unfortunately, is the degree to which we are angry with the harmers. So in a sense, that just counteracts the compassion, So to have compassion for the Russians too, that's another whole discussion. And that, of course, is very uniquely the Buddhist approach, which is based upon the logic of karma, which is the very first level of practice. And this is something pretty intense. As I always tell that story of these two young nuns that Richard Gere invited in 2003 when he invited 20 former prisoners to come to New York. And that's when I was working with people in prison. And it was the time His Holiness came to New York, and he invited these 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison, and to meet His Holiness. And it was a very wonderful day. I was there too. It was very moving, all talking about their suffering and the racism and the blah, blah, blah. So he also invited two young Tibetan nuns. So that we know that these Tibetans, the concept of karma, this philosophical view that's in the bones of their being for 1,200 years in their country, coming from India for a previous 1,500, 2,000 years. In other words, it's been in this view of the world is just in the world is the mind of Asians for 3,000 years. It's as easy for them to have the view of karma as it is for us to have the view of creator or the view of materialism, that's in the bones of their beings. It's just part of their lives. It's automatic. It's not a surprise to them. So they're these young women who talked about their suffering, being tortured and sexually abused in prison in Tibet, So what was fascinating to the Americans, I would say, as I observed, that these young women, you probably would think, well, if you want to quantify suffering, theirs was more than anybody's. But they weren't angry. And this is something we could spend an hour telling. I could talk to you. I could tell you about it for 1 hour. But anger, if you analyze the psychology of anger, the psychology of attachment, and this is the Buddhist analysis, if we look deeply, these are the delusions in our mind, these fabrications that are deep in the bones of our beings, that are the main voices of our ego and the main source of our pain, and which we can remove, Buddha says, because they're not at the core of our being. This is pretty intense stuff. That the voices of the voice, the words, what anger is saying is the outrage, the pain of why is this happening to me? This is why we suffer so terribly. And then we see it on the other side. Why is that suffering happening over to those victims? You know, we don't have an answer, so we go crazy. So here we're talking the Buddhist analysis. So we know the Buddhist analysis is continuity of consciousness. We've all bumped into these sentient beings countless times. Everybody who is kind to us, we've been kind to them. Every bit of happiness we have has come from our own past joy, our past virtue. This is the logic of the Buddhist analysis of karma, this natural law that runs the universe. So these young women having the view of karma in the bones of their being since their child, since they were children, working with this in their daily suffering in these prisons, they would not have the thought, why is this happening to me? They wouldn't have that anguish because they have the view of karma. It's real for them. So that's tremendous psychologically. That annihilates much of the craziness, much of the suffering. So then they're able to work with and manage this pain because they know they can't change it. So then at the end, there were tears, and one of the nuns said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers, because we know we must have harmed them in the past, and because we know they will suffer in the future for the suffering they're causing. So that's the view of karma. And that view, this is the whole Buddhist picture, the whole worldview. The view of compassion is driven by that. So that means we don't only have the compassion for Ukraine, we have also compassion for the Russians who are doing the harm. And the bodhisattvas actually will have more compassion for the harmers than the harmed, because the harmed are just finishing the results of their own karma, and the harmers are just beginning the suffering. That's the logic of compassion driven by karma, which is pretty powerful and quite shocking to us in our materialist models, you know. So it's kind of intense. So this is why, again, compassion on its own is just not enough. It's got to be driven by the view of karma, by the view of wisdom. This is enormous, and that's the first stages of practice. Then our compassion can become huge, and our courage can become huge, because we realize we are all in the same boat. Every person and animal and being and bug and monkey is harming themselves, because we don't have the law of cause and effect. They say the bodhisattvas have the greatest compassion for us because we don't realize each of us is creating our own happiness and our own suffering. We think it's out there. This is the dualistic result of ego grasping, but this is the major pain caused by lack of knowledge of cause and effect. The suffering from this is tremendous. That's the basis of the bodhisattva's compassion for all of us, you know. So, I mean, this is heavy duty stuff. We've got to think this stuff through. Not that easy, you know. But there's logic to it, is the point I'm trying to make. And then your compassion is limitless, effortlessly, and for everybody. For everybody. We're all in the same boat. This is powerful, you know. One step at a time, though. Any other questions?
Venerable?
Yes, there's Miguel and Arun. Talk to me, Miguel.
Okay.
Hi. It's a question regarding one comment you did at the beginning. It was every thought counts, right?
Yes, yes.
This thought of mine, my brother-in-law is sick 5 years ago. My sister is taking care of him, and she's suffering very badly.
Yes.
She's now 75 years old. And sometimes I think I would like my brother-in-law die so my sister could rest.
I understand. Yes.
And I really think very bad about that. I love my brother-in-law. It's
Yes,
like a brother to me.
That's right.
But and then my mind goes like, wow.
I understand.
I don't know. This is the situation.
I understand that. So I understand. It's a really interesting point. So are you feeling that your sister doesn't choose to help her husband, or she just does it out of duty and she's not happy?
No, she chooses actually.
She does choose.
To take care of him. Yes, she's taking care
Okay, then why? So then why are you? I mean, if she's really sincerely chosen it, Miguel, if she's really sincerely chosen it, then surely there's some joy that comes to her, or not? What do you think?
Wow, I don't. I don't know. I think she's very tired now.
Yes,
She's
of
sick
course.
too.
Yes, exactly.
She's also sick.
Yes.
She has
You know what? I think in situations like this, all you can do, Miguel, and that would be very valuable, is love your sister, praise your sister, thank your sister, show much love to her. This will be very nourishing for her heart, to show that she's not alone, to really appreciate her and love her. Don't feel sorry for her, but love her and praise her and delight in her, and, you know, and hug her and be kind to her. That will be very nourishing for her heart. This is the very best you can do, I would say. Do you understand?
Yeah, sure. I try to do that, but the problem comes to my mind when I think I would like my brother-in-law.
No, I understand that. So then that's what you want. I know, but then no point in torturing yourself about that, because it doesn't help. It just makes you miserable, and it doesn't help anybody. So I understand your point. I mean, what you really want is your sister to be relaxed and to be quiet. And of course, that's really wonderful because you love her. But it doesn't help you. It just makes you more anguished, doesn't it? Because it can't happen.
Yeah,
I understand. I understand, Miguel. It's an interesting point, isn't it?
thanks.
Thank you so much. Arun, yes, how can I help? Arun.
Sorry, I was just finding the unmute button.
Yes.
I just wanted to know a little bit more about Tonglen and
Yes.
kind of growing as a compassionate being.
Yeah.
Could you recommend any type of reading that I could do would help? That I
Oh,
could.
man. I know there's one. I mean, there's many teachings on this for sure. I mean, I wish we could think of Victoria. Maybe Victoria can do some research quickly with some of Lama Zopa's teachings. But I've got a feeling, Arun, I don't know if you know the website lamayeshe.com. Do you know that website? That's the teachings of Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, our teachers. And you just look up Lama Zopa Tonglen, and you'll find lots of teachings. lamayeshe.com, Lama YESHE.com.
Yeah,
and there's
that's fine.
thousands of teachings there by both Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. And Lama Zopa especially never stops talking about Tonglen. You'll definitely find plenty of teachings there. All right.
Thank you. I really appreciate
Good,
it.
Arun. Thank you so much, Arun. Thank you. Well, dearest people, what else? Another question before we finish. Our hour has gone like a dream. Who else is there? Maybe that's enough. What do you think, Victoria?
Any more questions, anyone?
Angela? No.
Yeah.
So what else is? Who is it? Rosanna, talk to me.
Well, it's not really a question, but you have steered so many questions, and so some is just this fine line between one who's truly compassionate shouldn't make any difference between oneself and others.
Yeah.
And so there is a basis which we are missing very much also in Buddhist circles, of self-compassion as a ground, as a liberating ground, especially because sometimes I see used certain concepts like the concept of karma.
Yeah.
I see it used in a way that closes the heart, not in a way that opens the heart.
I understand. So my thought, I understand very well your point. My sense is that these teachings about karma, because they're so utterly different to us, and because we already come to this philosophical view deeply ingrained in our mind with the view of punishment and reward. That's the view of morality that we have. So when we hear about karma, we simply assume it's more punishment and reward. So it sounds so heavy. So I think the teachings themselves are actually amazing, but they say it in a way that sounds to us heavy. But karma is that we create all our happiness, all our goodness. We are the one who has power, but this is hard for us to hear. So I think that's the first point. But I think the other point is so interesting. The compassion wing, the wisdom wing, which is the work on ourselves, that's the self-compassion wing. We just don't call it that, darling. That learned to be brave, to be strong, to see my own pain, to see my depression, to see my anxiety, to remove myself from rubbish relationships, to be. But the Buddhists teach, they don't say it like that. So we hear it as very kind of moralistic. We hear it as heavy. We've got to rephrase it,
Venerable.
Recomprehend.
I need to debate it with you.
Oh, you do? Good. Okay.
Because I feel,
darling, can we stop for a moment? For a moment? Are you
Yes.
debating Buddha's teachings Or because if you are, then I don't want to debate Buddhist teachings. That's
No,
your-
no, no. I'm
You're
debating certain interpretations, not. I feel,
So wait a minute. What are you debating? Which point, sweetheart? Which point?
well, the point that I debate is that. Well, can I talk personally? Personally, I think.
Already we're over time, but I'm more than happy.
Okay, then
No, darling,
next time.
why don't you just ask a question or say your point? Because which piece?
Well, one
are you
point is, for
debating?
example,
Which piece are you debating?
it's very difficult to say that women who are undergoing certain things and understand karma, since women are used to centuries of oppression and silence.
Exactly.
Yeah?
That's right. That's right.
And so, but there is, I told you, it's so many of the points that I would like to personally, because personally,
But I need to know, what are you debating? Buddha's teachings or
I
something?
think that ultimately karma is good.
Okay, so listen, so darling,
all
listen,
karma is
listen,
good. That's what I think.
let's finish with this point. There's no time to discuss. I'd like to say this to you. We first have to look at Buddha's teachings. If we decide we want to study Buddha's teachings, that's our decision. Then we have to get them accurate. We have to be accurate and present them in a way the best we can. Then we can't force people to hear it properly. We can't force people to not misinterpret it. I can't force that. So we must have the facts. So then it's up to each individual to take the view according to their capacity. So one woman I talked to, who whenever she heard karma, heard it as her being blamed. I said, forget about karma, darling, learn to love yourself. Another person, I would say something different. We all have to approach the teachings according to our capacity. That's my answer. Okay. Thank you, darling people.
Thank you so much, Venerable Robina. And I think we've got a question there that is being recorded. And finally, thank you for everything. Robina, could I ask you to do a dedication for everything that we've done today?
I'm just thinking we've been for 1 hour. Every thought counts. Every thought has gone into our mind. We've sown all these seeds. We make this aspiration that these maybe nourish these seeds from this moment forward with our marvelous practice, never giving up, developing our amazing potential for our sake and the sake of others. And we sing this little tiny prayer, may compassion, may bodhicitta, may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. Jangchob semchog Rinpoche, ma kye panam ke gyochik, kye panyampa me payang, gongne gongdu shok. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Much love, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Love to everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you, Robina.
Thank you.